Today's meeting couldn't be more timely. Just last week, NASA reported that last year was the hottest year on record, with wildfires raging not just in America and Australia, but in the Arctic too. According to WWF's most recent Living Planet report, over the past 50 years, population sizes of mammals, birds, fishes, amphibians, and reptiles have fallen by a staggering 68%. In other words, every warning light on the dashboard is flashing red. Now, of course, you all know that the UK is due to host COP26 later this year, but it's worth remembering that even if all the pledges that were made at the last major conference of the parties in Paris 5 years ago, even if all of those were met, which is unlikely, we would still be on track globally for over 3 degrees of warming. That is double the threshold of 1.5 degrees that governments have agreed to aspire towards. And in the stark words of the United Nations Environment Programme, warming of 3 degrees would, and I quote, bring mass extinction and large parts of the planet would be uninhabitable. So here at home, the government is sadly way off track when it comes to meeting its own inadequate climate targets, in particular the 4th and 5th so-called carbon budgets. Greta Thunberg famously said, act like your house is on fire because it is. And I would say that pledging to reach net zero by 2050, as our government has, is the equivalent to dialing 999 and asking for the fire brigade to come in 30 years' time. We know that the fire brigade needs to come now, and that is what we intend with this bill. So in terms of what it does, Safia's already set out the parameters, but essentially, although the Climate Change Act was undoubtedly a historic piece of legislation when it was passed in 2008, and many other countries have followed its pioneering approach in terms of setting legally binding carbon budgets, nonetheless, it is now way out of date. It is not up to the escalating emergency that is at our door. And that's why this bill aligns our climate targets with what the science now requires. And as you've heard, at its core, the bill would place in law a commitment to doing our fair share of keeping global temperature rises to below 1.5 degrees. It patches the hole in the Climate Change Act when it comes to things like shipping and aviation emissions, which weren't covered at all by the current legislation, neither are consumption emissions. And it's vital that we don't outsource responsibility to emissions to other countries. We need to have those on our accounting sheets. And that's what this bill does too. It focuses on nature, on protecting and critically restoring nature and biodiversity. And it establishes a climate assembly to deliberate on the difficult decisions and trade-offs, which will be essential when we put forward this new emergency strategy. So the focus of today's meeting is on why businesses should support this bill. And one answer I'm very aware is that, there are going to be huge opportunities in the green economy, that's where the jobs will be in the future, that it makes good business sense to be ahead of the curve, that it's what your customers want, that this is where the investment is going to be going from pension funds and elsewhere. And all of that is very true. But I think a more relevant answer is this, that businesses should support this bill because your future, all of our futures, depend on it. There is no successful business on a dead planet. And actually, the good news is that many businesses are way ahead of government in their thinking on this issue. I was struck that 50 years ago, the New York Times published an essay by Milton Friedman titled, "The Social Purpose of Business is to Increase Its Profits." Well, a few months ago, the New York Times announced details of a new business network called Imperative 21 that's launched a campaign promoting a reset of our economic system. And as they say, and I quote, 50 years of shareholder primacy has left us facing a climate emergency, collapse in our natural system, unjust and unsustainable levels of inequality, and low trust across society. It is critical that leaders everywhere come together in a reset. We must make sure that we build back better with the many populations our current system has left behind. It will take radical collaboration between the private sector, public leaders, and citizens to create the economy that we need. So those are stirring words from business, and I couldn't agree more. And this new business network, Imperative 21, represents 70,000 companies, 20 million employees, $6.6 trillion in revenue, and $15 trillion in assets under management. Some companies are already doing business in this way, and to separate the honest from the greenwash, and let's face it, that's something that needs to be done, then BCorp Certification is auditing them by an objective not-for-profit to measure how good for the world they really are. So businesses have huge influence with governments. In many senses, they're already ahead of government, and increasingly they are using your influence for good. And closer to home, we know that just last year, over 200 top UK businesses, organisations and investors called on our government to seek an environmentally focused recovery from the impact of COVID-19. And it made headlines across the media, making that case that a recovery plan to rebuild the economy must have an absolute focus on the climate and nature emergencies. And signatories to that letter included ASDA, the National Grid, PwC, Britvic, Lloyds, Siemens, BT, Coutts, Greggs, Heathrow Airport. I could maybe question about the alignment of Heathrow Airport with that, but nonetheless, there they were as signatures, and many others. And I think there is an increasing understanding that we are all in this together, and businesses has a vital role to play in ensuring that the policy framework that governments put in place creates the business certainty that you need and that investment needs. I just want to end by touching on the process and the status, if you like, of the bill, because I know people have asked about this. The bill is a private member's bill, and it is the case that unless the government makes time for the bill, then it doesn't get debated. But I just want to remind people that actually the Climate Change Act, the 2008 Act, which has been a pioneering piece of legislation that has not only influenced climate legislation in this country, but right across the world, that Act started its life as a private member's bill. And I have no doubt that when similar meetings would have been held in advance of that Act becoming law, people would have said, well, it's just a private member's bill. How does that affect things? But the truth is that a private member's bill can be a focus for mobilizing, for campaigning, for raising awareness and commitment, both outside Parliament and inside it. And it is significant that we have got support for this bill from MPs from all parties, that we've got nearly 100 MPs now supporting it, and these are very early days. And even if this bill in this form doesn't get parliamentary time next year, let's say, nonetheless, it sets the precedent. It is the blueprint or the green print, if you like, that will be built on into the future. And so I have every certainty that by coming behind this bill, we make the policies in it 100 times more likely to happen. So thank you again for your interest so far, and I look forward to working with you to put even more energy and dynamism behind this bill to get it onto the statute book as fast as possible.